Hey guys, how are you? Nighttime in California. I'm filling gas. We got a few minutes to talk. You know, in the last message I had, the last video I put up, people asked because I talked about, we're going to give you the weapons and the tools you're going to need to defend the church in battle. And people, some people are probably thinking, why are we using language like that? Isn't it about peace and love and everything? Well, one of the weapons is love. But this is a war. Whether you like it or not, there's a war going on. And, some people think, well, I don't want to be part of this war. Well, as soon as you were baptized, you were part of this war. Because if you think you don't want to participate, well, you're the first one that gets taken out by Satan in this big war. But the big war started when the heavens were created. The big war started with Lucifer disobeying God. And St. Michael, the war in heaven, St. Michael, the archangel with the angels, and Lucifer with his angels who became demons, they lose the war in heaven and they get cast down into hell. But the war didn't end for Lucifer there, because now the war is against us. He can't defeat God, and so he's going to come after his children, which is us. And we might go to sleep and we can rest, but Satan doesn't sleep and he doesn't rest. And his war against us is ongoing. So that's the first war in heaven. But if you look at, like, say, St. Peter in 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 8, he's telling you, be sober and alert, because the devil is prowling around like a roaring lion seeking to devour souls. Resist him, solid in your faith. St. Paul in Ephesians chapter 6, verses 11 and on. Read that whole chapter, because he's using warlike language. He's telling you, put on the armor of God, put on the breastplate, bring up your shield and resist the devil. And he says, we're not fighting against flesh and blood, we are fighting against principalities of darkness. And Pope John Paul II said there's the biggest battle going on right now between good and evil, the biggest battle that the world has ever known. And he said not even 1 in 1,000 even know that it's going on. There's a battle being waged. But the reason most people don't know that it's going on is because Satan doesn't come with you as this big, scary, mean guy. No, he'll come with you. He'll come at you as the nicest, best friend you've ever had. All your dreams he will make come true. He's not going to come and scare you. He's going to come pat your cheek. Hey there, pal. How are you? How you doing? And then, hey, all of a sudden he's sitting next to you as a passenger in your car. And pretty soon he'll be asking you, hey, can I drive for a little while? And you're like, no. And he'll be patient. Put the music on, the windows down, let the wind blow through your hair. Oh, this feels great. Hey, let me drive for a second. Now you can rest. And finally you go, okay. And Satan drives, and boom, he drives you off a cliff. So he'll come at you any which way he can. He'll come at you through temptation. But we've talked before, if you've watched the first 2 videos I put on the church, part 1 and part 2. If you haven't watched those, watch them, because part 1 talks about that Jesus established a church. And do you belong to the church that Jesus Christ himself established? And when you say that to people, our non-Catholic Christian friends will come and say, well, the church isn't actually a church like you think it's a church. It's actually an invisible church that's a loose body of believers. We are the Christians. We are the church. Yes, we are the church as Christians, but that's not the church that the Bible talks about. It actually doesn't say anywhere in the Bible that it's an invisible church. And we turn to Matthew chapter 18, verse 15 through 18, where it says, if your brother sinned against you, try and solve it between you two. If you convince him, you've won over a brother. If he doesn't listen to you, you take 2 or 3 witnesses. And if he doesn't listen to them, then you take it to the church. And so the point in the second video is how do you take it to the church if it's an invisible church? So watch that second video. But right after that, he says, what you bind on earth is bound in heaven. What you loose on earth is loosed in heaven. He's talking to the apostles, the first bishops, the church, the authority given to the church. So, it's not just scripture, because if you read on and you get into the book of Acts, you actually see this paradigm playing out. Because what's happening in Acts chapter 15 is some people were going around teaching. They were called the Judaizers. They were teaching that you had to be circumcised to be a Christian, just like you had to be circumcised to get into the Jewish the Jewish right and the old covenant with the Jews was you had to be circumcised. So they were teaching, well, if you want to be a Christian, you also have to be circumcised. Imagine being a pagan here and you're like, hey, I really like this Jesus guy. How can I join? Well, you got to be circumcised. And be like, I'm out. You know what I mean? But anyway, it's funny. But so we see this playing out. So this is a big heresy in the church at the time. So what do? You actually see this paradigm playing out. They try and solve it on the local level, and it doesn't work. So what do? They call 2 or 3 others. Who do they call? They call Paul and Barnabas. Not a bad 2 to call. They can't solve the problem, so what do? They take it to the church. It goes, you see the first council of Jerusalem. It's the first ecumenical council. And Peter and Paul and James, all the apostles are there, and they solve the problem as a church council. And it's solved, and they make a declaration, and thus saith God. They had the authority, and the problem was solved. So we see chapter 18, or Matthew 18, 15 through 18, playing out in Acts 15. We actually see that exact paradigm playing out. So that tells you how important the church is. And that's what happens over 2,000 years, over 20 centuries, is council after council, council after council arise every time there's a heresy. And then historians came out and said, you know what? Jesus is not God. There's a council. There's the Council of Carthage, the Council of Hippo, Vatican II. Every time a heresy arises, the church responds. A visible church responds, not an invisible church that, loose body of believers. So that's the authority given from Jesus Christ to the church to solve. And that's why the church has lasted 2,000 years, because of the promise of binding and loosing that Jesus gave the authority to the church. So I hope this helps. Stay tuned for the next video, because we're really going to get into it next. All right, God bless you guys. Bye.